There was a time when I believed my life was something others longed for, not because we were wealthy or lived extravagantly, but because I had what so many spend decades searching for: a loving marriage, a beautiful home filled with plans and possibilities, and a sister who had been my confidant since childhood. Morgan and I had built what I thought was an unshakable foundation. Katie, my younger sister, had always been there through every milestone, every celebration, every hardship. The three of us were inseparable, or so I believed. I never imagined that the two people I trusted most would conspire behind my back to destroy everything I cherished. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. When Morgan looked me in the eyes and said, "Alexa, I've fallen in love with Katie, and we're expecting a baby," something within me shattered. But from those broken pieces emerged a woman they never saw coming, one who would make them regret every secret smile, every hidden touch, every lie they ever told. My alarm went off at 6:30 a.m. as it did every weekday. I rolled over, reaching for Morgan's warmth beside me, but his side of the bed was already empty. I smiled, knowing exactly where he'd be. The soft clatter of pots and pans from the kitchen confirmed it. He was making breakfast, a Thursday tradition, before his later start at the architectural firm. 4 years of marriage, and he still surprised me with these small gestures. The scent of coffee and cinnamon wafted upstairs as I slipped into my robe. Our suburban home wasn't massive, but it was ours. A 1940s craftsman we'd spent the last 2 years renovating together, weekend by weekend. The worn hardwood stairs creaked under my feet, a sound that had become comfortingly familiar. "There she is," Morgan said, looking up from the stove where he was flipping French toast. His dark hair was still damp from the shower, and he wore the blue button-down shirt I'd given him for his birthday last month. At 34, he had the kind of easy confidence that came from knowing exactly who he was and what he wanted. "I was about to come wake you." I wrapped my arms around him from behind, pressing my cheek against his back. "You should have. I like your methods better than the alarms." He turned, spatula still in hand, and kissed me. "Coffee's ready. And Katie called. She's stopping by around 7 to pick up that box of decorations for the fundraiser." "Of course she is," I laughed, reaching for a mug. "My sister, the earliest bird in history." Morgan smiled. "She's determined. I'll give her that. The community center's lucky to have her organizing the event. This was our life. Simple, steady. Conversations about family and plans, and the ordinary details that weave a marriage together. I taught 3rd grade at Westlake Elementary, a 15-minute drive from our house. Morgan was an architectural designer at Carter & Associates, working his way toward a partnership. We had dinner with my parents every other Sunday, played board, games with our friends on Saturday nights, and were saving for a 2-week trip to Portugal in the summer. Katie lived just 20 minutes away in a downtown apartment, having moved to be closer to us after her tough breakup with Jacob 2 years ago. At 29, she was the energetic counterpoint to my more measured approach to life. Where I was organized and methodical, Katie brought spontaneity and laughter. She'd been that way since we were kids, 5 years apart but cosmically connected. "What time will you be home tonight?" I asked, sipping my coffee as Morgan slid a plate of French toast in front of me. "Probably 7. We've got that final review for the Riverdale project, but George promised he wouldn't let it run long." He sat across from me, our knees touching beneath the small kitchen table. "What about you? Book club tonight, right?" I nodded. "At Emma's house. We're discussing that thriller everyone's been talking about." I cut into my breakfast, savoring the first bite. "This is amazing, by the way. Secret recipe." He winked, though we both knew it was just my mother's recipe with a dash more vanilla. The knock at the door came just as we were finishing breakfast. Katie's signature rapid-fire pattern: 3 quick knocks, pause, 2 more. "I'll get it," Morgan said, standing up and brushing a crumb from his shirt. I watched him walk to the door, admiring the life we'd built. The kitchen renovation we'd completed last fall, with its sage green cabinets and white quartz countertops. The collection of framed photos on the wall, our wedding day, a hiking trip in Colorado, Katie and me as children building a sandcastle. My gaze lingered on that one. Me at 10, Katie at 5. Our matching blonde heads bent in concentration over our creation. The protective arm I had around her shoulders. The complete trust in her smile. From the entryway, I heard Katie's bright laugh. "Morning, Morgan. Sorry I'm so early. You know me. No concept of appropriate visiting hours." "Never apologize for bringing donuts," Morgan replied, and I could hear the smile in his voice. Katie breezed into the kitchen, a whirlwind of energy despite the early hour. Her blonde hair was pulled into a messy bun and she wore leggings and an oversized sweater, her standard uniform when she wasn't in the business attire her job as a marketing coordinator required. "Lex!" She placed a pink bakery box on the counter and wrapped me in a hug. "I brought Ellen's donuts, the maple bacon ones you're obsessed with." "You're the best," I said, squeezing her back. "I know," she grinned, releasing me to pour herself coffee. "So, tell me about the fundraiser. Is Morgan helping with the setup? I could use those tall person skills for hanging decorations." Morgan leaned against the counter. "I'm at your service. Just name the time." "Saturday, 9 a.m. I'm bringing coffee. And breakfast burritos as payment," Katie said, taking a seat at the table. This was the rhythm of our lives. The easy banter, the casual planning, the intertwining of our days. Morgan checking his watch and kissing me goodbye before heading to work. Katie and I lingering over coffee, discussing the fundraiser details, her latest date disaster, my students' science projects. "How's the house hunting going?" I asked her. Katie had been saving for a down payment, determined to buy rather than rent. "Slowly. Everything in my price range needs more work than I can handle." She sighed, then brightened. "But Morgan's been amazing, coming with me to viewings and pointing out issues I'd never notice. Those architect eyes catch everything." "He's good like that." I smiled, warmth blooming in my chest at how my husband looked out for my sister. Always seeing the potential beneath the surface. When Katie left with her box of decorations, promising to call me later about the fundraiser details, I cleaned up the breakfast dishes and prepared for my day at school. I paused at the family photo wall, straightening a frame that held our most recent Christmas picture. Morgan between Katie and me, his arms around both of us, all three smiling widely at the camera. Everything was as it should be. My marriage was strong, my relationship with my sister unbreakable, my life unfolding exactly as I'd planned it. I had no idea that underneath this carefully constructed reality, fault lines were already forming, cracks that would soon shatter everything I believed to be true. Morgan and I met 6 years ago at a charity auction hosted by the architectural firm where he worked. I was there representing Westlake Elementary, hoping to secure funding for our library renovation. He outbid everyone for a weekend getaway package I had my eye on, then promptly offered to split it with me. "It's a 2-bedroom cabin anyway," he'd said with that crooked smile that would eventually become my weakness. "Seems a waste for just one person." I declined, of course. Taking a weekend trip with a stranger wasn't exactly my style, no matter how charming his smile. But I did accept his business card and his offer to provide pro bono consultation for the library project. One consultation led to coffee. Coffee led to dinner. And before long, I found myself falling for the thoughtful architect with the deep laugh and patient eyes. Our courtship wasn't whirlwind or dramatic. It was steady, intentional, like Morgan himself. He showed up when he said he would. He remembered details about my students' projects. He asked questions about my dreams and actually listened to the answers. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel, It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. After years of dating men who treated reliability like an optional trait, Morgan's consistency felt like finally coming home. "He's the real deal, Lex," Katie had declared after first meeting him at a family dinner. She'd pulled me aside in the kitchen, her eyes wide with approval. "The way he looks at you when you're not watching, I'd kill for someone to look at. Me like that." Katie became Morgan's biggest cheerleader. When he was nervous about meeting our parents, she coached him on all their quirks and preferences. When he was stressed about a big project at work, she'd drop off his favorite cookies from Ellen's bakery with encouraging notes. And when he finally proposed on a snowy December evening in the gazebo at Kingston Park, Katie was the one who helped him plan every detail. From the string lights to the photographer hidden behind the bushes. The wedding was small, but perfect. 50 guests in my parents' backyard. Katie as my maid of honor. Morgan's college roommate George as his best man. In her toast, Katie's voice had cracked with emotion. "Alexa has been my protector, my guide, my best friend since the day I was born," she'd said, raising her glass. "Today, I'm so happy to share that role with a man who's proven he deserves her every single day. Morgan, you're not just gaining a wife, you're gaining a sister too." Those first years of marriage exceeded every expectation. We traveled when we could, explored local hiking trails on weekends, and spent cozy evenings planning our future. We decided to buy the craftsman house that needed some TLC, as the listing diplomatically put it. What followed were months of demolition, reconstruction, and decorating debates that somehow brought us closer instead of driving us apart. "You have the patience of a saint," Emma commented one girl's night after I showed photos of our half-finished kitchen. "I'd have murdered Carter 3 times over if we had to live through that kind of renovation." But the truth was, Morgan and I worked well together. We complemented each other's strengths and balanced each other's weaknesses. When I got too bogged down in details, he helped me see the bigger picture. When he got too ambitious with project timelines, I brought realistic scheduling to the table. We were a team in the truest sense of the word, and Katie was part of that team too. After her breakup with Jacob, she became an even more constant presence in our lives. She'd come over for Sunday dinners, help me grade papers, assist Morgan with small renovation projects around the house. The 3 of us developed inside jokes and traditions, like our terrible movie Tuesday every other week, where we'd watch the worst films we could find and compete to make the most scathing commentary. I never once felt threatened by their closeness. Why would I? Katie was my sister, my blood, my first best friend. And Morgan was my husband, my partner, my future. Their friendship seemed like the most natural thing in the world, a bonus blessing in my already fortunate life. "You're lucky," my mother once observed as we watched Morgan and Katie arguing playfully over the proper way to grill vegetables in our backyard. "Most women would be jealous of their husband being so close with their sister." "That's because most people don't have a sister like Katie," I'd replied confidently. Katie had always been my fiercest defender, even when we were children. I remembered how she'd once confronted a group of 5th-grade girls who had excluded me from a birthday party, her tiny 7-year-old self standing up to girls nearly twice her size. "Anyone who's mean to my sister is mean to me," she'd declared, hands on her hips. "And you don't want to be mean to me." That protective loyalty had never wavered as we grew up. When I went through a devastating breakup in college, Katie drove 3 hours in the middle of the night to be at my side. When I was nervous about my first teaching job, she helped me prepare for weeks, playing the role of both students and parents in mock scenarios. Katie was the person who knew all my secrets, all my fears, all my dreams. And Morgan had earned my trust in ways both big and small. The way he called when he was running late, never leaving me to wonder. The way he defended me to his mother when she made passive-aggressive comments about my career. The way he held me through the grief when we discovered having children might be more complicated for us than we'd hoped. "We're a family already," he'd whispered one night as I cried over yet another negative pregnancy test. "You and me. And whatever comes next, we face it together. Always." It was moments like these that built the foundation of my absolute faith in both of them. The accumulated history of reliability, of showing up, of choosing each other again and again. The night before everything changed, we had a simple dinner at home. Lasagna from Morgan's grandmother's recipe, garlic bread, a bottle of red wine. Katie had brought over. The three of us sat around our kitchen table, planning the community center fundraiser and laughing about Katie's latest dating app disaster. "I swear, the men in this town," Katie sighed, refilling her wine glass. "Is it too much to ask for someone kind, stable, and taller than me?" "You'll find him," I assured her, reaching across the table to squeeze her hand. "Someone who deserves you." "Someone like Morgan," she said, smiling at my husband. "But available. And hopefully with better taste in movies." We all laughed, and I remember thinking how perfectly content I felt in that moment. My husband, my sister, my home, the people I trusted most in the world, sitting around my table, safe in the knowledge that we'd always be there for each other. 24 hours later, that perfect trust would be shattered beyond recognition. Looking back, I can pinpoint exactly when things began to change, though I didn't recognize it at the time. It was early February, just after Katie's 30th birthday celebration. We had thrown her a surprise party at her favorite restaurant, with Morgan taking charge of the guest list and arrangements. He'd been unusually invested in making sure every detail was perfect, staying up late to design custom invitations, making multiple trips to specialty stores for decorations, insisting on picking up the cake himself rather than having it delivered. "You're going above and beyond," I'd told him, touched by his dedication to making my sister's birthday special. "Katie's lucky to have you as a brother-in-law." He'd given me an odd look then, something flickering behind his eyes before he smiled and said, "She's family. It's important." The Monday after the party, Morgan began working later hours. At first, it was just an occasional late meeting or deadline crunch. Nothing unusual for an architectural firm with multiple projects in development. But by March, the late nights had become more frequent, stretching from once a week to 3 or 4 times. "The Westbrook development is in its final phases," he explained, kissing me distractedly when he came home after 9 p.m. for the 3rd time that week. "Once we get through this month, things should calm down." I believed him because I had no reason not to. Morgan had always been transparent about his work schedule, often texting me updates throughout the day or calling on his drive home. But now his texts became sporadic, his calls shorter. When he was home, he seemed distracted, checking his phone more frequently, excusing himself to answer calls in another room. "Everything okay?" I asked one evening, when he returned from taking a call on the back porch, his expression unreadable in the dim kitchen light. "Just work stuff," he replied, sliding his phone into his pocket. "George is having some issues with the zoning permits." I nodded, accepting this explanation even as a small voice in the back of my mind noted how quickly he'd answered, as if the response had been prepared. Meanwhile, Katie's behavior shifted in subtle ways too. She began declining our regular Tuesday movie nights, citing work commitments or plans with friends I'd never heard her mention before. When she did join us, she seemed different, more reserved, less likely to meet my eyes during conversation, always the first to leave. "Is Katie seeing someone new?" I asked Morgan one night as we got ready for bed. "She seems distracted lately." He dropped the shirt he was folding, then quickly picked it up again. "Not that she's mentioned to me. Why?" "Just a feeling. She's being weirdly secretive." I frowned, applying moisturizer to my face. "Usually she tells me everything about her dating life. Overshares, actually." Morgan shrugged, his back to me as he hung up his clothes. Maybe she's just taking a break from dating after that disaster with the lawyer guy. Maybe, I agreed, though it didn't quite fit. Katie had never been one to withdraw, even after breakups. She processed emotions outwardly, talking through every detail until she'd worked it out of her system. In April, Katie missed Sunday dinner with our parents for the first time in years, texting last minute that she wasn't feeling well. When I stopped by her apartment the next day with soup and crackers, she answered the door looking perfectly healthy, if slightly startled to see me. "You didn't have to come by," she said, not inviting me in as she usually would. "I'm feeling much better today." "That's some miraculous recovery," I teased, peering past her into the apartment, which looked unusually tidy. "Mind if I come in? I haven't seen your place in ages." She hesitated, just long enough for me to notice. "Actually, I was just heading out to run some errands. Rain check?" I left feeling unsettled, a sensation that only intensified when I mentioned the interaction to Morgan that evening. "That does seem odd," he agreed, though he didn't quite meet my eyes. "But you know Katie, she's always been independent. Maybe she just needs some space." "From me?" I asked, hurt by the suggestion. "We've never needed space from each other before." Morgan backtracked quickly. "That's not what I meant. Just that everyone goes through phases where they're more introspective." The next strange incident occurred when I borrowed Morgan's laptop to check emails while mine was updating. A notification popped up from his calendar app. "Meet Kay, 2 p.m., Riverside Park." I clicked on it without thinking, surprised to see it was scheduled for that very afternoon when Morgan had told me he had a site visit in the opposite direction of the city. When he came home that evening, I casually asked how the site visit went. "Productive," he said, loosening his tie. "We're finally making progress on those foundation issues I told you about." I waited for him to mention the park meeting, but he didn't. For the first time in our marriage, I felt a cold sliver of doubt work its way into my heart. "Did you have any other meetings today?" I asked, trying to keep my voice casual. He paused. "Just a fraction too long. Just the usual check-ins with the team." "Why do you ask?" "No reason," I said, forcing a smile. "Just curious about your day." That night, I lay awake beside him, listening to the steady rhythm of his breathing and wondering why he had lied. There could be innocent explanations. Maybe Kay was a client he didn't want to discuss. Maybe the meeting had been canceled. Maybe I was overreacting to normal fluctuations in our routines. But then there was Katie's behavior too. The missed gatherings, the vague excuses, the sudden reticence. My sister, who had once called me twice a day just to chat, now took hours to respond to my texts. One evening in late April, I stopped by Katie's office to surprise her with coffee, hoping to reconnect. Her assistant looked confused. "Katie's been gone for the last hour," she said. "She had a doctor's appointment." "Is she sick?" I asked, immediately concerned. Katie hadn't mentioned any health issues. "I don't think so," the assistant replied. "She's had several appointments over the past few weeks, but she seems fine. Glowing, actually." I thanked her and left, the coffees growing cold in my hands as I walked to my car. Katie had always shared everything with me, especially health concerns. When she'd had a cancer scare 2 years earlier with an abnormal pap smear, I'd gone to every appointment with her. Why would she hide doctor visits now? Unless they weren't the kind of appointments you tell your sister about. That night, I scrolled through my recent photos, landing on one from Katie's birthday. There she was, sandwiched between Morgan and me, her smile bright, but somehow different. I zoomed in on her face, studying it with growing unease. Something had changed in my sister, something I couldn't quite define but could definitely feel. A secret knowledge behind her eyes, a separation where there had never been one before. And then there was Morgan, his arm around Katie's waist instead of her shoulders where it would normally rest. his smile tight, almost nervous. They weren't looking at the camera in that moment. They were looking at each other. I closed the photo, telling myself I was imagining things, creating connections that weren't there. But the doubt had taken root, and no amount of rationalization could quite dig it out. The community center fundraiser was scheduled for the first Saturday in May, a spring carnival with games, food trucks, and a silent auction. As the event's organizer, Katie had been working on it for months, and despite her recent distance, she'd insisted that both Morgan and I be involved. Morgan had designed and built several game booths, while I was in charge of coordinating the elementary school choir performance. That morning dawned clear and warm, perfect weather for an outdoor event. Morgan had left earlier to help with setup, kissing me goodbye with a distracted "see you there" that lacked his usual warmth. I took my time getting ready, gathering the choir programs I'd printed and the basket of homemade cookies I'd promised for the bake sale. When I arrived at the community center grounds, the carnival was already in full swing. Children raced between colorful booths, parents lined up at food trucks, and volunteers in matching t-shirts directed traffic and answered questions. I spotted Emma manning the ticket booth and waved as I made my way toward the choir staging. "Aria, Alexa," she called, gesturing me over. "The kids are looking for you. They're supposed to perform in 20 minutes. I hurried to drop off my baked goods, and then spent the next hour focused entirely on wrangling 30 excited third graders through their performance. It went surprisingly well. Only one case of stage fright and minimal off-key singing. As the children dispersed to find their parents, I finally had a moment to look for Morgan and Katie. I checked the game booths first, then the food area, growing increasingly frustrated when I couldn't find either of them. I pulled out my phone to text Morgan, only to discover it had died. I'd forgotten to charge it overnight. With a sigh, I borrowed Emma's phone to call him, but the call went straight to voicemail. "Have you seen Katie?" I asked Emma as I returned. Her phone. "Or Morgan?" She frowned slightly. "I saw Katie heading toward the storage building about half an hour ago. Something about needing more prizes for the ring toss. Morgan might be with her. He was helping restock the booths earlier." The storage building was a small outbuilding behind the main community center, used primarily for equipment and seasonal decorations. As I walked toward it, I noticed how quiet this area was compared to the carnival grounds, the sounds of laughter and music fading with each step. The door to the storage building was slightly ajar, a sliver of light visible in the dimness. As I approached, I heard voices, low, urgent, intimate. I slowed my pace, an inexplicable sense of dread washing over me. "We can't keep doing this," Katie's voice trembling slightly. "It's killing me, Morgan. Every time I see her, I feel sick with guilt." "I know," Morgan's voice now heavy with emotion. "But we need to find the right time to tell her. This isn't something we can just blurt out." My hand froze on the door handle, my breath catching in my throat. "There's never going to be a right time to tell your wife you're in love with her sister," Katie said, her voice breaking, "and that we're having a baby together." The world tilted sideways. I must have made a sound, a gasp, a whimper, something, because suddenly the voices stopped. The door pulled open, and there they stood, Katie and Morgan, their faces draining of color as they saw me. "Alexa," Morgan whispered, his expression cycling rapidly through shock, guilt, and something that looked horribly like relief. "We didn't. This isn't," but it was. It was exactly what it seemed. Katie stood slightly behind him, one hand protectively over her stomach, a gesture so instinctive, so maternal, that it confirmed everything in an instant. She wasn't showing yet, but her slightly fuller face, the glow the assistant had mentioned, it all made terrible sense now. "How long?" I asked, my voice unnaturally calm, as if it belonged to someone else entirely. They exchanged a glance, a private communication between conspirators that sent a blade of pain through my chest. Alexa, please. Katie stepped forward, tears welling in her eyes. We never meant for this to happen. We tried to fight it. How? Long. Each word precision cut from ice. Morgan swallowed visibly. Since January, after the New Year's party. 4 months. While I'd been teaching my students, planning our summer trip to Portugal, thinking about our future, my husband and my sister had been having an affair. While I'd been worrying about Katie's unusual behavior, concerned for her health and happiness, she'd been carrying my husband's child. Were you ever going to tell me? I asked, still in that strange, detached voice. Or were you just going to keep lying until what? The baby was born? Looked too much like you to explain away? We were trying to find the right moment, Morgan said, reaching for me. I stepped back, his hand grasping empty air. Alexa, you have to believe me. Neither of us wanted to hurt you. A laugh escaped me then, sharp and bitter. That's fascinating, because from where I'm standing, hurting me is exactly what you've accomplished. I turned to Katie, really looking at my sister, my flesh and blood, my closest friend since childhood. You're pregnant with my husband's baby? She nodded, tears streaming down her face. I'm so sorry, Lex. I hate myself for this. We both do. Don't call me that, I said, the nickname suddenly unbearable on her lips. You don't get to call me that anymore. The distant sounds of the carnival, the laughter, the music, the announcements over the PA system created a surreal backdrop to this nightmare. Somewhere nearby, children were playing games my husband had built, eating cotton candy, having their faces painted. Life continuing as if mine hadn't just imploded. Alexa, Morgan tried again, his voice pleading. We need to talk about this, properly. Let me explain. Explain what? I cut him off. Explain how you fell in love with my sister? How you've been sneaking around behind my back for months? How you've both been looking me in the eye every day while lying to my face? I shook my head, stepping further away from them both. I don't need explanations. I need you both out of my sight. Please, Katie sobbed, reaching for me. Alexa, you're my sister. We can't leave it like this. You should have thought about that before you slept with my husband. The words were bullets, precise and devastating. Before you decided to have his child. Morgan ran a hand through his hair, desperation in his eyes. What do you want us to do? Just tell us what you need right now. What I needed? I needed to rewind time. I needed to unknow what I now knew. I needed my life back, the life I'd believed, in just 5 minutes ago. I need you to leave, I said finally, a strange calm settling over me. Both of you, right now. They hesitated, exchanging another of those conspiratorial glances that made my stomach turn. Alexa, we can't just... Morgan began. You can and you will, I interrupted, my voice suddenly sharp enough to cut. Because if you don't, I'm going to walk back to that carnival and announce to everyone there, including my parents, exactly what I just discovered. Is that what you want? The threat worked. They gathered their things in silence, Katie wiping tears from her face, Morgan looking shell-shocked. As they moved past me toward the door, Morgan tried one last time. I'll come home later tonight, he said quietly. When you've had some time to process, we can talk then. Don't bother, I replied, not looking at either of them. The locks will be changed by tonight. As they walked away, I remained standing. In that dusty storage room, surrounded by boxes of carnival prizes and decorations, feeling as if I'd just stepped into someone else's life. The world I'd known, the marriage I'd trusted, the sister I'd loved, had vanished in an instant, replaced by something unrecognizable and grotesque. I waited until they were gone before I finally allowed myself to feel it. The rage, the betrayal, the grief crashing over me in suffocating waves. I sank to the floor amidst the forgotten carnival supplies and began to shake, my entire body rebelling against this new reality. My husband, my sister, a baby, the ultimate betrayal from the two people I had trusted most in the world. I don't remember leaving the storage building or making my way back to the parking lot. I don't remember the drive home or unlocking the front door. The next clear memory I have is standing in the middle of our bedroom, mine and Morgan's, staring at the life we'd built together, his clothes hanging next to mine in the closet, his reading glasses on the nightstand, the framed photo of us, on our honeymoon, grinning at the camera from a sailboat in Greece. Every object, every inch of this room suddenly felt contaminated by his betrayal. I sank onto the edge of the bed, my body heavy with a grief so profound it felt physical, a crushing weight on my chest that made it difficult to breathe. The tears came then, hot and relentless, my entire body shaking with the force of them. I cried until my throat was raw, until my eyes burned, until there was nothing left but dry, heaving sobs. Eventually, I dragged myself to the bathroom and caught sight of my reflection. Swollen eyes, blotchy skin, hair disheveled. I barely recognized the woman staring back at me. Who was she now? Not a beloved wife, not a trusted sister, just someone who had been foolish enough to believe in people who didn't deserve her faith. I splashed cold water on my face, and then, moving on autopilot, found my phone charger. As soon as my phone powered on, it exploded with notifications. 3 missed calls from Morgan, 5 from Katie. Text messages from both of them, pleading for a chance to talk, to explain, to make things right. As if anything could ever be right. Again, there was also a text from Emma. "Are you okay? You disappeared from the carnival. Let me know if you need anything." I ignored them all and instead called a locksmith, who promised to come within the hour. Then I called my parents and, in a voice I barely recognized as my own, told them I wouldn't be at Sunday dinner tomorrow. No, nothing was wrong. Just tired. Yes, Morgan and Katie would probably still come. No, I didn't want to talk about it. The locksmith arrived, a middle-aged man with kind eyes who asked no questions when I requested all the locks changed, just nodded and got to work. While he was busy at the front door, I moved through the house in a daze, gathering Morgan's essential items, his laptop, medications, important documents, and packing them into a duffel bag. Not out of consideration for him, but because I couldn't bear the thought of him returning for them, invading my space again. The sound of a car pulling into the driveway sent a jolt of panic through me. Through the window, I saw Morgan's Audi. The locksmith was still working on the back door. Not ready, not ready, not ready. The words pulsed through my mind in time with my racing heart. "Ma'am?" the locksmith called. "Someone's trying to get in the front door. Should I—" "Don't let him in," I said sharply. "I'll handle it." I moved to the front window and pulled back the curtain just enough to see Morgan standing on the porch, key in hand, looking confused as he tried again to unlock the door that no longer matched his key. Our eyes met through the glass. He raised his hands in a pleading gesture. "Alexa, please." I could hear his muffled voice. "We need to talk. Let me in." I let the curtain fall back into place and stepped away from the window. My phone buzzed with an incoming call. Morgan, of course. I declined it, then turned the phone off completely. The locksmith finished his work half an hour later, handing me a set of new keys with a sympathetic smile. "All done, ma'am. Front, back, and garage doors." "Thank you," I said, pressing a generous tip into his palm. "I appreciate your discretion." After he left, I stood in the silent house, suddenly unsure what to do next. Morgan had given up trying to get in, at least for now. The duffel bag with his things sat by the door, an ugly reminder of how quickly a life could unravel. The doorbell rang, startling me. Not Morgan this time. Katie. I could see her through the peephole, her face tear-stained, her shoulders hunched. My sister, my only sibling, The person who had held my hand at our grandmother's funeral, who had helped me move into my first apartment, who had written sisters by birth, friends by choice in my birthday card just months ago. Now, the sight of her made me physically ill. "Alexa, please," she called through the door. "I know you're in there. I just need 5 minutes. Please." I pressed my forehead against the door, eyes squeezed shut, trying to block out the sound of her voice. The person on the other side of that door wasn't my sister anymore. She was a stranger who happened to share my blood, a stranger who had betrayed me in the most profound way possible. "Go away, Katie," I finally said, loud enough for her to hear. "There's nothing you can say that I want to hear." "I never meant to hurt you," she said, her voice breaking. "We never wanted this to happen. It just did." A surge of anger cut through my numbness. "Things don't just happen, Katie. You made choices, both of you. Every secret text, every lie, every time you slept with my husband, those were choices." Silence. Then a soft sob. "I love him, Lex. And he loves me. We tried to fight it, but—" "Don't you dare!" I hissed through the door. "Don't you dare try to romanticize what you did. This isn't some star-crossed lovers bullshit. This is you sleeping with your sister's husband. This is you getting pregnant with his child while looking me in the face every day. This is the two people I trusted most in the world conspiring to destroy me." More silence then. "What? What are you going to tell Mom and Dad?" Of course, that would be her concern. Her reputation. How our parents would see her. Not the irreparable damage she'd done to me, to our relationship, to our family. That's not your concern anymore. My voice was flat, emotionless. "Now leave before I call the police and report you for trespassing." That night was the longest of my life. I moved through the house like a ghost, touching objects that suddenly seemed to belong to someone else's life. The throw blanket Katie had given us last Christmas. The coffee table Morgan and I had refinished together. The framed photos of the three of us that now seemed like elaborate lies. I couldn't eat, couldn't sleep. I sat on the living room floor, surrounded by those photos, methodically removing them from their frames and cutting Katie and Morgan out of each one, watching their smiling faces fall to the floor like confetti. A childish, destructive act that brought no real relief, but I couldn't stop myself. My phone remained off. I couldn't bear to hear their excuses, their justifications, their demands for forgiveness. The world outside this house had ceased to exist. There was only this pain, this betrayal, this hollow space where my life used to be. Around 3 a.m., exhausted beyond measure, I curled up on the couch, unable to face the bed I'd shared with Morgan. As I drifted into a fitful sleep, one clear thought emerged from the chaos of my mind. I would never be the same person again. The Alexa who had existed yesterday, trusting, loving, secure in her place in the world, that woman was gone forever. Who would emerge from these ashes remained to be seen, but one thing was certain. She would never be so easily destroyed again. The days that followed blurred together in a haze of grief and rage. I called in sick to work, unable to face the thought of standing in front of my third graders pretending that my world hadn't collapsed. The principal was understanding. I had plenty of unused sick days, and the school year was winding down. The substitute could handle things until I was ready to return. If I would ever be ready to return. I ignored the growing pile of messages from Morgan and Katie. Texts, voicemails, emails, each notification a fresh stab of pain that I couldn't bear to face. Instead, I remained in our house, my house now, moving between the couch and the kitchen and the bathroom in a numbed state of existence that couldn't really be called living. The doorbell rang periodically. Sometimes Morgan, sometimes Katie. Once my mother, who left a concerned voicemail afterward. Alexa, honey, what's going on? Katie's been crying for days and Morgan looks terrible. They won't tell us anything, just that you three had some kind of fight. Please call me back. I didn't. I couldn't explain to my parents that their younger daughter was pregnant with their older daughter's husband's baby. I couldn't bear to see the shock and disappointment in their eyes, couldn't handle the questions they would inevitably ask. How long had it been going on? Had there been signs I missed? Did I suspect anything? Questions I was already torturing myself with every sleepless night. On the fourth day of my self-imposed isolation, Emma came by. Unlike the others, she didn't leave when I failed to answer the door. Instead, she called through the mail slot. Alexa, I know you're in there. I brought wine and chocolate, and I'm not leaving until you let me in. I'll camp on this porch all night if I have to. She would too. Emma had been my friend since college. Stubborn, loyal, and impossible to deter once she set her mind to something. After 15 minutes of her intermittent calling and knocking, I finally opened the door. Her eyes widened as she took in my appearance. Unwashed hair pulled back in a messy bun, wearing the same sweatpants and t-shirt I'd been in for days. Dark circles under my swollen eyes. Jesus, Alexa, she whispered, stepping inside and closing the door behind her. What happened? I couldn't form the words. Instead, I simply broke down, collapsing into her arms and sobbing with a violence that shocked us both. Emma held me, murmuring soothing nonsense, guiding me to the couch where she continued to hold me until the storm passed. Morgan and Katie, I finally managed, my voice raw from crying. They've been having an affair since January. Emma's face went through a series of expressions: shock, disbelief, and finally, a burning anger. What? No, that's not. Are you sure? She's pregnant with his baby, I said flatly. Oh my God! She reached for my hand, squeezing it tightly. Alexa, I'm so sorry. I can't even imagine. I found out at the carnival. Overheard them talking in the storage building. Emma's eyes filled with tears. That's why you disappeared, and why Katie's been calling everyone frantically trying to find you. She shook her head. I had no idea. None of us did. Well, that makes two of us, I said bitterly. Emma stayed with me that night, forcing me to eat something, helping me shower, and change into clean clothes. The next morning, she called Carter and asked him to bring groceries, which he did without question, his normally jovial face solemn as he took in my state. Whatever you need, Alexa, he said simply, giving my shoulder a gentle squeeze before leaving. Day or night, we're here for you. Their kindness should have been a comfort, but it only made the betrayal of Morgan and Katie sharper by contrast. If friends could show such loyalty, how could my sister and husband have failed so completely? A week after the revelation, I finally turned my phone back on, steeling myself against the flood of notifications. Dozens of missed calls, more text messages than I could count, emails, social media messages. The digital evidence of two people desperately trying to reach me. I ignored most of them, only reading enough to understand that Morgan was staying with George, that he wanted to come get more of his things, that he and Katie needed to talk with me to figure out next steps, as if this were a business transaction gone wrong, not the complete destruction of my life. I replied to only one message, Morgan's request to collect his belongings. Items on front porch in boxes. Will be out from 2-4 p.m. tomorrow. Do not come when I am home. Cold. Impersonal. The only communication I could manage without falling apart again. The next day, I placed several cardboard boxes on the porch containing more of Morgan's clothes, books, and personal items, then drove to a coffee shop across town, unable to bear the thought of being home when he came. When I returned, the boxes were gone, replaced by a single envelope with my name written in Morgan's familiar handwriting. I considered burning it without reading it, but some masochistic impulse made me tear it open instead. Alexa, it began, I know no apology could ever be sufficient for what we've done to you. I won't insult you by trying to explain or justify it. All I can say is that hurting you was never what we wanted. You deserve better than how we treated you. The house is yours, of course. I've spoken to a lawyer about the separation of our other assets and will handle whatever paperwork is necessary without bothering you further. If you ever feel ready to talk, I'm here. With deepest regret, Morgan. No mention of love, not for me, not for Katie. No explicit acknowledgement of the pregnancy. Just formal, careful words that acknowledge the practical aftermath, but not the emotional devastation. I crumpled the letter and threw it across the room, then sank to the floor, a fresh wave of grief washing over me. This was my reality now. My husband loved my sister. They were having a baby together. My marriage was over. My relationship with my only sibling was destroyed. The worst part was the isolation. I couldn't talk to my parents without revealing Katie's betrayal, something I wasn't ready to do. I couldn't bear to explain the situation to friends or colleagues, to see the pity in their eyes, to answer their questions. So apart from Emma and Carter, I withdrew from everyone. I stopped answering the door, stopped responding to messages, stopped leaving the house except for essential errands. I existed in a bubble of pain, reliving every moment with Morgan and Katie, searching for signs I had missed, for some hint that might have prepared me for this catastrophe. At night, I would wake from nightmares where I watched helplessly as Morgan and Katie laughed together, their hands caressing her growing belly, their voices calling me pathetic, naive, blind. I would jolt awake, sheets soaked with sweat, tears streaming down my face, my heart pounding with a rage so intense it frightened me. 2 weeks after the carnival, I received a formal email from Morgan's lawyer, divorce papers, as amicable and generous as possible under the circumstances. The house would remain mine. Our savings would be divided equally. Morgan would continue paying his portion of the mortgage for 6 months to give me time to decide whether to keep the house or sell it. I signed the papers without reading all the details, just wanting it to be over, wanting some formal acknowledgement that the life I'd thought I was living had legally ceased to exist. That night, I sat alone in the backyard, a glass of wine in hand, staring up at the stars and wondering how I could possibly recover from this. The enormity of the betrayal seemed insurmountable, the pain too deep, the loneliness too complete. I had thought rock bottom was the moment I discovered their affair. I was wrong. Rock bottom was here, now, this hollow existence, this half-life. Of avoidance and grief, this inability to imagine a future beyond pain. But even in the darkest valleys, there is eventually a moment when the descent stops, a moment when you realize you've reached the lowest point and the only way left is up. For me, that moment came with a text message from an unexpected source, arriving as I sat contemplating the empty expanse of my future. Alexa, it's Jacob, Katie's ex. I think we need to talk. I stared at Jacob's text for a long time, my thumb hovering over the keyboard. Katie had dated Jacob for nearly 3 years before their breakup 2 years ago. He was a financial analyst, serious, reserved, the polar opposite of Katie's usual vivacious personality. I had always liked him, though we weren't close. After the breakup, he'd disappeared from our lives completely, Katie refusing to discuss what had happened beyond vague references to growing apart and wanting different things. What could he possibly want to talk about now? Curiosity finally won out over caution. About what? I texted back. His response came almost immediately. Not over text. Can we meet? Tomorrow, maybe? I hesitated again. The thought of leaving my sanctuary, of facing another human being who knew my sister, was daunting. But something about Jacob's message sparked the first genuine interest I'd felt in weeks. Fine. Coffee brew on 5th, 10 a.m. I'll be there. Thank you, Alexa. The next morning, I showered for the first time in days, applied minimal makeup to hide the worst of the dark circles under my eyes, and pulled on clean jeans and a sweater. The woman in the mirror was still a pale shadow of my former self, but at least I looked human again. Coffee Brew was busy with the mid-morning rush when I arrived. Jacob was already there, sitting at a corner table with 2 cups in front of him. He stood as I approached, his expression a careful neutral. "I ordered your usual," he said, gesturing to the latte. "At least what used to be your usual. Extra. Shot. No foam." "Thanks," I replied, sliding into the seat across from him. "It still is." Jacob looked much the same as I remembered. Tall, lean, dark hair, cut conservatively short, serious eyes behind wire-framed glasses. He was handsome in an understated way, the kind of looks that improved the longer you knew him. "How are you holding up?" he asked after I'd taken a sip of coffee. I gave him a look. "Fantastic. Never better." His mouth quirked in what might have been a smile. "Fair enough. Stupid question." "Why did you want to meet Jacob?" I asked, too exhausted for small talk. "I'm assuming you've heard about Morgan and Katie." He nodded, his fingers tightening around his cup. "Yes. That's why I reached out. I thought you might want to know the truth about why Katie and I broke up." Something in his tone made me sit up straighter. "I was told you grew apart." Jacob's laugh was short and bitter. "Is that what she said?" "No, Alexa. We didn't grow apart. I caught Katie in bed with Morgan 2 years ago, in my apartment." The coffee cup slipped from my fingers, splashing hot liquid across the table. Jacob quickly grabbed napkins, mopping up the spill while I sat, frozen, his words echoing in my head. 2 years ago? I finally managed, my voice hardly more than a whisper. "They've been... for 2 years?" Jacob's face softened with sympathy. "I'm sorry. I thought you might have suspected, especially after what's happened now. But I can see this is a shock." "They told me it started in January," I said numbly. 4 months ago." He shook his head. "No, it was definitely going on 2 years ago. I came home early from a business trip and found them together. Morgan begged me not to tell you, said it was a one-time mistake, that he loved you, that they'd both been drinking and made a terrible error in judgment." "And you believed him?" The question came out sharper than I intended. "No," Jacob replied simply. "But I believed Katie when she cried and said she'd lose her sister forever if I told you. I loved her, despite what she'd done. So I agreed to keep their secret on one condition, that Katie and I were done, and that she and Morgan never see each other that way again." I stared at him, trying to process this new information. My marriage had been a lie for even longer than I'd realized. The betrayal ran deeper, stretched further back in time than I'd known. "Why tell me now?" I asked finally. "Why not when it happened?" Jacob looked down at his coffee. "I should have told you then. That's on me, and I'm sorry. I convinced myself it was a one-time thing that you were better off not knowing about. That telling you would only hurt you unnecessarily." He sighed. "Then I left town, took a job in Seattle to get away from everything. I only moved back last month. When I heard about their current situation, I realized they must have continued the affair despite their promises to end it." I leaned back in my chair, feeling hollow. Why would Katie even date you if she was in love with Morgan? "I've asked myself that 1,000 times, Jacob said. "Best I can figure is that she wanted a cover. Dating me gave her a reason to be around your house, around Morgan, without suspicion. And maybe she did care for me in her way. Just not enough." His words hit me like a physical blow. All those times Katie had come over while Jacob was working, late. All those dinners and movie nights where she and Morgan had shared inside jokes. All those house projects Morgan had helped her with. The signs had been there for years. I had just been too trusting to see them. "I'm sorry to dump this on you," Jacob continued when I remained silent. "But I thought you deserved to know the full truth. And He hesitated, then pushed forward. And I thought maybe you could use an ally. Someone who understands exactly how it feels to be betrayed by both of them. I studied his face, seeing beyond the composed exterior to the pain that still lingered in his eyes. Jacob had loved Katie, had been hurt by her and Morgan just as I had been. Different circumstances, same betrayers. What kind of ally? I asked cautiously. Something shifted in his expression, a hardening, a focus. The kind who thinks people who betray the ones who love them shouldn't get to walk away unscathed and live happily ever after. The words sent a jolt through me, awakening, something that had been dormant beneath my grief, a hunger for justice, for consequence, for Morgan and Katie to feel even a fraction of the pain they had inflicted on me. What are you suggesting? Nothing illegal, he clarified quickly. I'm not talking about slashing tires or breaking windows. I'm talking about making sure they don't get to just ride off into the sunset without facing the consequences of what they've done. I leaned forward slightly. How? I'm not entirely sure yet, he admitted. But I have some information that might be useful, and two minds are better than one. For the first time in weeks, I felt a flicker of something other than despair, a small, hot spark of purpose. What kind of information? Jacob glanced around the cafe, then lowered his voice. Morgan's firm is under financial strain. They've been hiding it well, but I have contacts in the industry. They lost a major client last month, and two of their biggest projects are in trouble. Morgan's position isn't as secure as he'd like everyone to believe. I processed this, remembering how Morgan had always been so confident about his career trajectory, so certain of his eventual partnership. And Katie? I asked. Still financially dependent on your parents in ways she doesn't admit, Jacob said. That downtown apartment? Your father co-signed the lease. Her car payments? Your mother helps with those. She portrays herself as independently successful, but the reality is quite different. I sat back, my mind suddenly clearer than it had been in weeks. They're both more vulnerable than they appear. Jacob nodded, watching me carefully. Exactly. For the first time since the carnival, I felt something like energy flowing through my veins, replacing the leaden exhaustion that had weighed me down. I'm not sure what I want to do with this information, I said slowly. But I'm certain of one thing. I'm done hiding in my house, crying over people who don't deserve my tears. Jacob's expression softened slightly. That's a start. As we left the cafe an hour later, having exchanged phone numbers and agreed to meet again, I felt fundamentally different than I had when I arrived. The pain was still there, a throbbing wound that might never fully heal, but alongside it was something new. Resolve. That evening, I did something I hadn't done since the betrayal. I cleaned the house from top to bottom, throwing open windows to let in fresh air, packing away the last of Morgan's things, washing the sheets and towels, scrubbing every surface until it gleamed. This house was mine now. This life was mine, and I was taking it back. I stood in the newly cleaned kitchen, looking around at the space that had witnessed so much happiness and heartbreak, and made a decision. I would not let Katie and Morgan's betrayal define me. I would not let their actions determine my worth or my future. I picked up my phone and for the first time in weeks called my mother. Alexa? She answered immediately, relief evident in her voice. Honey, we've been so worried about you. Mom, I said, my voice steady. I need to tell you something important about Katie and Morgan. It was time to stop protecting those who had betrayed me. Time to let the truth come to light. Time to stop being a victim and start taking control of my narrative. The spark of transformation had been lit, and I was ready to let it burn. Telling my parents the truth was both harder and easier than I expected. Hard, because I had to watch their faces transform with shock, disbelief, and then a profound sadness that mirrored my own. easy because the words flowed from me with a clarity and strength I hadn't felt in weeks, my voice steady as I laid out the facts without embellishment or emotional breakdown. 2 years, my father repeated, his face ashen. They've been carrying on behind your back for 2 years? According to Jacob, yes, I confirmed. And now she's pregnant with Morgan's child. My mother pressed a hand to her mouth, tears streaming down her face. I can't believe Katie would do this. To her own sister. We raised her better than this, my father said, his voice rough with emotion. Both of them should be ashamed. Their immediate support, their unquestioning belief in my account, loosened something that had been tight in my chest since the carnival. I had been unconsciously afraid they might somehow take Katie's side, might find some way to justify or excuse what she and Morgan had done. Their clear moral stance was a validation I hadn't realized I desperately needed. What are you going to do? My mother asked, reaching across the kitchen table to squeeze my hand. I'm not sure yet, I admitted, but I'm not going to just disappear or roll over and let them have their happily ever after without consequences. My father nodded slowly. That seems fair. You know we're behind you, whatever you decide. After they left, promising to deal with Katie themselves, I sat at my computer and began to research divorce laws in our state, property rights, employment regulations at Morgan's architectural firm. Knowledge was power, and I needed all the power I could get. The next day, I met with a divorce attorney, a sharp-eyed woman named Ellen Taylor, no relation to the bakery owner, who had a reputation for being both fair and formidable. I laid out everything: the affair, Jacob's revelations about its duration, the pregnancy, the financials. You're in a strong position, she told me, making careful notes. Morgan seems to be offering a generous settlement, likely out of guilt. But given the circumstances and the length of the deception, we could push for more. I don't want to be greedy, I said. I just want what's fair. Fair would be him losing everything, she replied with a hint of steel. But we'll settle for what's legally advantageous to you. The house, half his retirement accounts, and spousal support for at least 2 years while you rebuild your life. Given his infidelity with your sister, no judge would deny you that. By the time I left her office, I had a clearer picture of my legal options and a strategy for the divorce proceedings. Morgan's initial offer had been generous, yes, but not as generous as what I was legally entitled to. I would counter with terms that would leave him feeling the financial strain of his choices for years to come. Next on my agenda was work. I called the principal and arranged to return the following week for the final month of the school year. I needed normalcy, routine, the comfort of my classroom and my students. I needed to start rebuilding my professional life even as my personal one lay in ruins. That evening, Jacob called. How did it go with your parents? About as well as could be expected, I said, curled up on my couch with a glass of wine. They're devastated but supportive. My father's going to talk to Katie tomorrow. And the lawyer? She thinks I can get a better settlement than what Morgan offered. Good. There was a pause then. I've been thinking about what we discussed, about consequences. I took a sip of wine. I'm listening. Morgan's firm is bidding on a major downtown revitalization project. It would stabilize their finances and secure his position for years to come. How do you know this? I told you, I have contacts in the industry. The bid deadline is next Friday. If they lose this project, they'll be in serious trouble. I felt a chill run down my spine. What are you suggesting? I'm not suggesting anything illegal, Jacob clarified again. Just that information about the firm's current financial instability might find its way to the selection committee. Public projects require stable partners. A whisper of trouble could be enough to tip the scales to another bidder. I considered this. It wasn't illegal, as Jacob said, just a strategic sharing of already existing information. And it would hit Morgan where it hurt. His career, the thing he took the most pride in. I'll think about it, I said carefully. Of course. No pressure, Jacob replied. Just an option to consider. After we hung up, I paced my living room, turning over the possibility in my mind. Was I really the kind of person who would deliberately sabotage someone's career? Even someone who had betrayed me so completely? Before I could answer that question, my phone rang again. Katie. I stared at her name on the screen, my heart pounding. After a moment's hesitation, I answered. Alexa? Her voice was small, broken. Please don't hang up. What do you want? I asked, surprising myself with how cold I sounded. Dad came to see me today, she said, her voice hitching. He told me, about how long Morgan and I have been involved. Involved, I repeated. Is that what you call sleeping with your sister's husband for 2 years? Being involved? I'm so sorry, she whispered. We never meant to… To what? Get caught? Because you certainly meant to betray me. You certainly meant to lie to my face, day after day, year after year. You certainly meant to build a relationship on the ruins of my marriage. It wasn't like that, she protested weakly. Then what was it like, Katie? Explain it to me. Help me understand how my sister and my husband could do this to me. There was a long silence, broken only by the sound of her crying. Finally, she spoke, her voice barely audible. We fell in love. We tried to fight it. We ended things after Jacob found out. We really did. For almost a year, we stayed away from each other. But then we couldn't anymore. So, your feelings justify destroying me? I asked, incredulous. Your happiness is worth my pain? No, of course not, she said quickly. But the baby. Alexa, I'm having a baby. Your niece or nephew. I know you hate me right now, and you have every right to, but this child is innocent. The manipulation was so transparent it almost made me laugh. Katie had always been skilled at deflecting blame, at finding the emotional leverage to escape consequences. This time it wouldn't work. My congratulations to you both, I said evenly. I hope you'll be very happy together, but don't ever contact me again. Alexa, please. I hung up, my hand steady, my resolve strengthened. Any lingering doubt about… Jacob's suggestion vanished. Morgan and Katie hadn't just made a mistake or had a momentary lapse in judgment. They had systematically deceived me for years, had built an entire secret relationship while pretending to love and care for me. They deserved whatever consequences came their way. The next morning, I called Jacob. I've been thinking about that. Information on Morgan's firm. I think the selection committee for the downtown project would be very interested to know about their financial instability. I agree, Jacob said, and I could hear the satisfaction in his voice. I can make sure it reaches the right people anonymously. Do it, I said, a strange calm settling over me. And Jacob? Thank you for telling me the truth when no one else would. You deserve to know, he replied simply. I'll keep you updated on what happens with the bid. That afternoon, I went for a long walk in the park, my mind clearer than it had been since the carnival. For the first time, I was doing something other than reacting to the betrayal. I was taking deliberate action, making choices that would shape what happened next. It wasn't about revenge, I told myself. It was about justice, about ensuring that actions had appropriate consequences, about refusing to be the only one who suffered while Morgan and Katie built their new life on the foundation of my pain. And it was just the beginning. As I walked, plans began to form in my mind, strategic, calculated moves that would use every bit of information I had about both of them. Morgan's professional vulnerabilities, Katie's financial dependence, their shared fear of public scandal. By the time I returned home, I had mentally mapped out a campaign that would make them feel, if not the same pain they had caused me, at least enough discomfort to understand that betrayal came with a cost. I was no longer just surviving this ordeal. I was reclaiming my power, one careful move at a time, and it felt right. It felt necessary. It felt like the only path forward that allowed me to look at myself in the mirror and recognize the woman staring back at me. A woman who would not be broken. A woman who would not be pitied. A woman who would ensure that those who had wronged her would remember her not as a victim, but as a force to be reckoned with. The broken-hearted wife was gone. In her place stood someone new, someone stronger, someone focused, someone willing to fight back. And Morgan and Katie were about to discover exactly what that meant. Returning to my classroom the following Monday felt like stepping into someone else's life. The colorful bulletin boards, the little desks arranged in pods, the morning messages still written in my handwriting on the whiteboard, all of it seemed to belong to a different Alexa, one who had existed before the carnival, before my world imploded. My students, however, greeted me with unbridled enthusiasm, rushing to hug me and share everything I'd missed during my absence. Their innocent excitement, their uncomplicated joy at having me back, was the first genuine comfort I'd felt in weeks. In their eyes, I wasn't a betrayed wife or a discarded sister. I was simply Ms. Reynolds, their teacher, someone who mattered in their small worlds. "We missed you so much," Lily said, presenting me with a stack of handmade cards from the class. "Ms. Peterson was nice, but she didn't do the voices during story time like you do." I laughed, my first real laugh since the betrayal. "Well, I missed all of you too, and I promise extra special voices during story time today to make up for it." Immersing myself in teaching provided a respite from the constant thoughts of Morgan and Katie. For 6 hours each day, I could focus entirely on lesson plans, student needs, and the upcoming end-of-year activities. The familiar routine was healing, in ways therapy could never be, giving me purpose and reminding me that I had value beyond my failed marriage. In the evenings, I continued my research and planning. Jacob and I spoke regularly, sometimes meeting for coffee to discuss new developments. True to his word, he had arranged for information about Morgan's firm's financial troubles to reach the downtown project selection committee. "They've delayed the decision," he told me one evening over the phone. "Word is they're requesting additional financial documentation from all the top contenders. Morgan's firm is scrambling to present a stronger case." "Good," I said, feeling that now familiar mixture of satisfaction and resolve. "How's the rest of our plan coming along?" The rest of our plan involved a methodical approach to ensuring both Morgan and Katie faced appropriate consequences for their actions. Not revenge, I kept reminding myself of that distinction, but justice. Actions had repercussions. They needed to experience some measure of what they had inflicted on me. For Katie, that meant financial reality. Through my parents, I learned she had been counting on their continued financial support, even as she and Morgan prepared for their baby. She'd been operating under the assumption that our parents would help with the down payment on a house, would contribute to the baby's expenses, would continue the pattern of subsidizing her lifestyle that had been in place since she graduated college. My father, his disappointment in Katie evident, had made it clear that would no longer be the case. "We're not going to abandon our daughter or our grandchild," he told me. "But the free ride is over. The financial help stops now. She and Morgan need to stand on their own 2 feet." For Morgan, our focus was professional. Beyond potentially losing the downtown project bid, Jacob had subtly spread concerns among industry contacts about the firm's stability. Nothing libelous, nothing that could be traced back to us. Just careful questions here, expressions of concern there, creating an atmosphere of uncertainty around Carter and Associates that could impact future business. But my reconstruction wasn't solely focused on consequences for Morgan and Katie. I was also rebuilding myself, piece by careful piece. I started therapy with a counselor who specialized in betrayal trauma. Dr. Elena Winters listened without judgment as I poured out the whole sordid story, then helped me develop strategies for processing my anger and grief in healthy ways. What you're feeling is normal, she assured me during our second session. Betrayal by the two people closest to you is one of the most profound traumas a person can experience. It disrupts your entire understanding of your life and relationships. Will I ever trust anyone again? I asked her, the question that had been haunting me for weeks. Yes, she said with quiet confidence. But you'll trust differently. More carefully, perhaps. More wisely. And there's strength in that. I joined a gym, channeling my anger into physical exertion that left me too exhausted for the nightmares that had plagued me. I reconnected with friends I'd neglected during my marriage, accepting dinner invitations and even attending a concert with Emma and Carter. I started a journal, pouring my darkest thoughts onto the page rather than allowing them to circulate endlessly in my mind. Each of these actions was a brick in the foundation of my new life, a life constructed on my terms, shaped by my choices, rather than by the betrayal I had suffered. 1 month after the carnival, I met with Morgan to finalize our divorce settlement. The meeting took place in my lawyer's office, a neutral space where I could face him with professional support at my side. It was the first time we'd been in the same room since the storage building confrontation. Morgan looked different, thinner, with dark circles under his eyes and a tension in his shoulders that hadn't been there before. When he saw me, his face registered surprise, as if he'd expected me to look as diminished as he did. Instead, I had deliberately dressed for impact, a tailored blue dress that had always been his favorite, my hair freshly cut in a sleek new style, subtle makeup enhancing. My features, I wanted him to see not a shattered ex-wife, but a woman who was moving forward with strength and purpose. "Alexa," he said softly as I took my seat across the conference table. You look good." "Thank you," I replied coolly, placing my folder of documents in front of me. "Shall we begin?" My lawyer efficiently guided us through the terms of the settlement, which had been revised considerably from Morgan's initial offer. The house would remain mine, with Morgan continuing to pay his portion of the mortgage for 1 year. Half of the his retirement accounts would transfer to me. I would receive alimony for 3 years to help rebuild my financial stability after the divorce. Morgan agreed to everything without argument, his eyes occasionally seeking mine across the table, perhaps looking for some sign of the woman he had married. I gave him nothing, maintaining a poised, businesslike demeanor throughout the meeting. As we prepared to sign the final papers, he cleared his throat. "Can I have a moment alone with Alexa, please?" My lawyer glanced at me, eyebrows raised. After a moment's consideration, I nodded. 5 minutes. When we were alone, Morgan leaned forward, his expression earnest. "I know nothing I can say will make up for what I've done," he began. "But I need you to know how sorry I am, Alexa. Not just for the affair, but for lying to you for so long. For betraying your trust. You deserved better." I studied him, this man I had once loved with my whole heart, this stranger who had dismantled my life for his own desires. "Is that it? You're sorry?" He winced. "What else can I say?" "Nothing," I replied honestly. "There is nothing you can say that would change what happened or make it hurt less. I didn't agree to speak with you to hear apologies, Morgan. I agreed because I wanted you to see me. To really see what you lost. To understand that while you and Katie are facing the consequences of your choices, I am rebuilding my life. I will be fine. Better than fine." "I know you will," he said quietly. "You were always the strongest of us all." It might have been a compliment, but it landed like an insult. Don't rewrite history to cast me as the strong one and yourself as the weak one who couldn't help falling for my sister, I said sharply. You made choices, Morgan. Deliberate, repeated choices to betray me. Own them. He flinched, then nodded slowly. You're right. I'm sorry. Stop apologizing and start living with the consequences, I said, gathering my papers. That's all I have to say to you. As I walked out of that meeting, divorce papers signed and a fair settlement secured, I felt a weight lift from my shoulders. Not the entirety of the burden I'd been carrying. That would take much longer to shed, but enough to feel the difference in my stride, in my breathing, in the set of my shoulders. I was reclaiming my life, one signature, one decision, one day at a time. And in that reclamation, I was discovering a resilience I hadn't known I possessed. The woman who had crumpled to the floor of a storage building upon discovering her husband's betrayal was gone. In her place stood someone new, someone who had been broken, but had pieced herself back together, stronger at the seams. 2 months after the carnival, the power dynamics had shifted dramatically. What had once been an overwhelming tsunami of betrayal washing over me had receded, revealing a changed landscape where I was no longer drowning but standing firm on solid ground. The downtown revitalization project, the one that would have secured Morgan's firm's future, was awarded to a competitor. Jacob shared the news with me over dinner at a small Italian restaurant we'd begun frequenting. Carter and Associates didn't even make the final 3, he said, a quiet satisfaction in his voice. The selection committee cited concerns about their financial stability as the primary reason. I twirled pasta around my fork, considering this information. How bad is it for them? Bad enough. Word is they're laying off staff next month. Morgan's position is probably safe for now, but partnership is off the table indefinitely. And with a baby on the way, he let the implication hang in the air between us. The news should have filled me with vindictive pleasure. Instead, I felt a complex mixture of satisfaction and something like pity. Not enough pity to regret our actions. Morgan had made his choices and now faced the professional consequences, but enough to recognize the human cost. What about Katie? Jacob asked, his tone carefully neutral whenever he mentioned my sister. Despite working together on our justice campaign, I knew it still hurt him to discuss her. According to my mother, she's starting to feel the pinch, I replied. The reality of living on just Morgan's salary, which isn't as secure as she thought, is setting in. Apparently, she's had to give up her downtown apartment and move in with him. His place is half the size of hers. Downsizing before the baby even arrives, Jacob noted. Not exactly the fairy tale ending they imagined. No, I agreed. It's not. The changes weren't limited to Morgan and Katie. I, too, was in a period of transformation. The school year had ended, and I'd made the decision to use the summer to completely renovate my house, erasing every trace of the life I'd shared with Morgan and creating a space that was entirely mine. Emma had introduced me to her brother, a contractor who gave me a friends and family discount on tearing out the kitchen Morgan and I had designed together and installing something sleeker, more modern, more me. The master bedroom was next, followed by the bathrooms. By August, the house would be unrecognizable to anyone who had known it before, a physical manifestation of my personal reinvention. I'd also decided to shift grade levels at school, moving from 3rd grade to 5th. A new classroom, new curriculum, new challenges, all part of my determination to move forward rather than simply recover. These changes weren't just external. In therapy, I was working through the complex emotions surrounding the betrayal, the anger, the grief, the lingering questions about what I could have done differently. Dr. Winters had helped me understand that while I couldn't control what Morgan and Katie had done, I could control how their actions shaped my future. You're in the driver's seat now, she told me during one session. They're no longer determining the course of your life. You are. And then there was Jacob. What had begun as an alliance based on shared betrayal had evolved into something more complex. We weren't dating. Neither of us was ready for that. But there was a growing connection between us, an understanding that went beyond our mutual desire for justice. We met several times a week, sometimes to discuss new developments in our plan, sometimes just to enjoy each other's company. We should celebrate, Jacob said now, raising his wine glass. To consequences. I lifted my own glass. To consequences, I echoed, and to new beginnings. As we clinked glasses, my phone buzzed with an incoming call. My mother's name flashed. On the screen. Sorry, I said to Jacob. I should take this. He nodded, and I stepped outside the restaurant to answer. Alexa, my mother said, her voice tight with tension. I thought you should know. Katie's in the hospital. There's been a complication with the pregnancy. I gripped the phone tighter, a storm of conflicting emotions washing over me. This wasn't part of the plan. This wasn't the kind of consequence I'd wanted. Is the baby? I couldn't finish the question. They're both stable for now, my mother replied, but the doctors ordered bed rest for the remainder of the pregnancy. She's going to need help, Alexa. The implication was clear in my mother's voice. Despite everything, despite the betrayal and the pain, Katie was still my sister. The baby, innocent in all of this, was still my niece or nephew. I'll be there in 20 minutes, I heard myself say. As I ended the call and turned back toward the restaurant to explain to Jacob, I realized the balance had shifted once again. The careful control I'd been maintaining, the strategic distance I'd established, all of it was about to be tested, in ways I hadn't anticipated. The question now was whether I could maintain my hard-won strength in the face of my sister's vulnerability, or whether old patterns would reassert themselves, pulling me back into the family dynamics that had enabled the betrayal in the first place. The hospital corridor seemed endless as I made my way to Katie's room. Each step required deliberate effort, my body resisting even as my mind had already made the decision to come. Jacob had understood immediately when I explained the situation, offering to drive me, but this was something I needed to do alone. Outside her door, I paused, taking a deep breath to steady myself. Through the small window, I could see Katie, lying in the hospital bed, monitors beeping softly around her. Morgan sat beside her, his head bowed, holding her hand. My parents stood at the foot of the bed, their faces drawn with worry. For a moment, I considered turning around, walking away, protecting the new strength I'd worked so hard to build. But that would be the old Alexa, the one who ran from difficult confrontations, who prioritized others' comfort over her own needs. The woman I was becoming faced challenges head-on. I pushed open the door. The conversation inside halted abruptly. 4 pairs of eyes turned to me, registering shock, relief, and in Morgan's case, unmistakable apprehension. Alexa, my mother breathed, moving toward me. You came. Katie's face crumpled, tears immediately streaming down her cheeks. Lex, she whispered, using the nickname I'd forbidden. This time, I didn't correct her. Mom said there were complications, I said, my voice carefully neutral. Is the baby okay? Placental abruption, Morgan answered when Katie seemed unable to speak. They've stopped the bleeding, but she needs complete bed rest until delivery. The baby's stable for now. I nodded, processing this information. Good. An awkward silence fell over the room. My father cleared his throat. Your mother and I were just going to get some coffee. Morgan, would you like to join us? Morgan glanced between Katie and me, clearly reluctant to leave us alone together, but my father's firm expression left little room for argument. Sure, he said finally, squeezing Katie's hand before following my parents out of the room. When the door closed behind them, Katie and I stared at each other. 3 years of sisterhood, 2 years of betrayal, and 3 months of silence stretching between us like an unbridgeable chasm. I didn't think you'd come, she said finally. Neither did I admitted, moving to stand at the foot of her bed rather than taking the chair Morgan had vacated. But despite everything, you're still my sister, and that baby is innocent in all of this. Fresh tears filled her eyes. I'm so sorry, Alexa. I know I've said it before, and I know it's not enough, but I am. What Morgan and I did to you, Didn't come here for apologies, I interrupted, unable to bear another round of remorse that changed nothing. I came to make sure you and the baby are all right. That's all. Katie nodded, wiping at her tears. Things aren't going well for us, Alexa. Morgan's firm is in trouble. We had to move to a smaller place. Dad's cut me off financially. It feels like everything's falling apart. She was looking at me with a familiar expression, the one she'd worn since childhood whenever she'd gotten herself into trouble and needed me to fix it. Half self-pity, half expectation that I would sweep in and make everything right. Not this time. Actions have consequences, Katie, I said firmly. You and Morgan made choices. Repeatedly. Over years. Now you're living with the results of those choices. You had something to do with Morgan's firm losing that big project, didn't you? She asked, her expression changing. Jacob's been helping you. I didn't bother denying it. Yes. Why? Haven't we suffered enough? I'm on bed rest. Our finances are a disaster. Morgan's career is imploding. Suffered enough? I cut her off, my voice rising despite my efforts to remain calm. You think 3 months of discomfort even begins to compare with what you put me through? You and Morgan betrayed me for 2 years, Katie. You lied to my face every day. You watched me build a life on a foundation of lies, knowing the whole time that you were sleeping with my husband behind my back. Katie flinched at my words but didn't argue. You're right, she said softly. We deserve whatever happens to us. I'm scared, Alexa. For the baby. Her hand moved protectively to her stomach, and despite everything, I felt my resolve soften slightly. The baby truly was innocent. I didn't come here to argue, I said finally. I came to tell you that I'll help, not for you, not for Morgan, but for my niece or nephew. I'll drive you to doctor's appointments. I'll help get the nursery ready. I'll be there for the birth, if you want me to be. But don't mistake this for forgiveness, Katie. And don't think for a second that it means things can go back to how they were before. Relief and sadness warred on her face. I understand, she whispered. And thank you. As I turned to leave, she called after me. It's a girl, the baby. We're having a daughter. I paused at the door, my back to her, absorbing this information. A niece, a little girl who would grow up in the shadow of all this pain and betrayal? Congratulations, I said, and walked out. In the hallway, I nearly collided with Morgan, who was returning alone with a coffee cup in his hand. For a moment, we stood facing each other. The man I had once loved and built a life with, now a stranger who had caused me unimaginable pain. Thank you for coming, he said quietly. It means a lot to Katie. I looked at him, really looked at him, and saw what I hadn't been able to see in the lawyer's office. The strain of recent months had aged him. The confident architect with the promising future had been replaced by a man weighted down by the consequences of his own actions, trying to prepare for fatherhood amid professional and financial uncertainty. The reckoning had come for all of us in different ways. And somehow, standing in that hospital corridor, I realized that I no longer felt crushed by the weight of their betrayal. I was standing tall while they were the ones struggling to remain upright. I didn't come for Katie, I said simply. I came for my niece. Autumn arrived, painting the trees in fiery hues and bringing with it a sense of change, of endings and beginnings. My renovated house now reflected the person I had become, stronger, more intentional, unafraid of standing alone. Gone were the compromises Morgan and I had made in our decorating choices. Every room now spoke of my tastes, my preferences, my vision. My new 5th grade class had just completed their first month of school, and I found I enjoyed the challenges of teaching older children, their developing critical thinking, their emerging personalities, their capacity for deeper conversations. The change had been exactly what I needed professionally. Katie remained on bed rest, her pregnancy now in its 8th month. True to my word, I drove her to medical appointments twice a week, maintaining a polite but distant relationship. We didn't discuss the past or attempt to rebuild our sisterhood. Instead, we focused exclusively on the baby's health and the practical matters of her impending arrival. Morgan kept his distance during these visits, making himself scarce when I came to their apartment. The place was indeed much smaller than Katie's former downtown residence, a cramped two-bedroom with thin walls and outdated fixtures. Evidence of their financial strain was visible in the second-hand furniture, the lack of decorative touches, the carefully budgeted groceries. Jacob and I continued to see each other, our relationship evolving beyond our initial alliance for justice. We weren't quite dating, but there was a tenderness between us, a mutual understanding born of shared experience and recovery. We took things slowly, both aware of the wounds that were still healing. "Do you think you'll ever forgive them?" he asked one evening as we walked through the park, leaves crunching beneath our feet. I considered the question carefully. "I don't know if forgiveness is the right word," I said finally. "What they did fundamentally changed who I am and how I see the world. I can't undo that, and neither can they. But I think I'm reaching a point where I'm no longer defined by their betrayal." He nodded, understanding. "That's probably healthier than forgiveness." "What about you?" I asked. "Have you forgiven Katie?" Jacob was quiet for a moment. "I've let go of the anger," he said. "It was consuming too much of my energy. But forgiveness implies there's a relationship to repair, and there isn't. Not anymore." We walked in companionable silence for a while, each lost in our own thoughts. Then Jacob took my hand, his fingers warm against mine in the crisp autumn air. It was a small gesture, tentative and yet profound, a step towards something new, something untainted by the past. Emma and Carter invited us to dinner the following weekend, our first official appearance as a couple among friends. The evening was filled with laughter, good food, and conversation that never once touched on Morgan or Katie. It felt like a glimpse into a possible future, one where their betrayal was a chapter in my past, not the defining element of my present. 3 days later, my mother called to tell me Katie had gone into labor. Despite being nearly a month early, the baby was fully developed and the delivery was proceeding normally. I finished my school day, then drove to the hospital with a strange sense of calm. This moment had been approaching for months, yet I still wasn't sure how I would feel when it arrived. The maternity ward was quiet when I arrived. My parents sat in the waiting room, my father pacing nervously while my mother knitted something small and pink. "She's still in labor," my mother said, looking up as I entered. "Morgan's with her." I nodded, taking a seat across from her. "How long has it been?" "About 10 hours now," my father answered, checking his watch. "The doctor says it could be a while yet." We waited together, the three of us linked by blood and history, but divided by the knowledge of what Katie and Morgan had done. My parents had maintained relationships with both Katie and me, walking a careful line between their daughters. I didn't envy them the position Katie's actions had put them in. Just after midnight, Morgan appeared in the waiting room doorway, his face exhausted, but radiant. "She's here," he announced. 6 pounds, 3 ounces. Both Katie and the baby are doing well. My parents immediately stood, embracing him and asking questions about their new granddaughter. I remained seated, watching the scene with a strange detachment. This should have been a joyous family moment, unmarred by the complicated emotions that now swirled beneath the surface. When my parents went in to see Katie and the baby, I stayed behind, unsure if I was ready for this step. Morgan hesitated in the doorway, then approached me directly for the first time in months. "Her name is Olivia," he said quietly. "Katie wants you to meet her, if you're willing." Olivia. My grandmother's name. The name Katie and I had both loved. As children, had both claimed for our future daughters. Of course she would choose it now. I stood smoothing my slacks with steady hands. "I'll meet my niece," I said, my voice even. "That doesn't change anything else." Morgan nodded, understanding the boundaries I was maintaining. He led me to Katie's room, then tactfully stepped out, leaving me alone with my sister and her newborn daughter. Katie looked up as I entered, her face showing the exhaustion of labor, but also a tentative hope. In her arms was a tiny bundle wrapped in a hospital blanket, just the pink face visible. "Alexa," she said softly, "meet Olivia." I approached the bed cautiously, looking down at my niece for the first time. The baby was beautiful in the way all newborns are, red-faced and wrinkled, with a tuft of dark hair that could have come from either Morgan or Katie. As I gazed at her, Olivia opened her eyes, unfocused and dark blue. A tiny hand escaped the blanket, fingers curling reflexively around air. Without thinking, I offered my finger, and those miniature fingers wrapped around it with surprising strength. In that moment, looking into the innocent face of this new life, I felt something shift inside me. Not forgiveness for Katie and Morgan, that might never come, but a certainty that the path forward was clear. I would be this child's aunt. I would love her and protect her and be present in her life, even as I maintained the necessary distance from her parents. This was my new reality. Complex, imperfect, but entirely my own. A life built not despite the betrayal, but because of how I had responded to it. A life that spoke not of what had been done to me, but of what I had done with. "She's beautiful," I said simply, still connected to my niece by that tiny, grasping hand. "Hello, Olivia. Welcome to the world." Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.